butchered it. Okay. All right. So she designed our crash. So it was kind of funny. Those cars weren't crashed, and A-plus towing, which I think Ricky had a little bit too much fun crashing those cars. So they actually crashed them for us, but they went off of her design. So I will let her kind of go over this. A lot of you guys had some like physics questions and stuff like that. So hopefully she can answer that for you. So without further ado, here's your speakers.
Today we're going to present the crush in Huntingtown. And before we get started, my name is Dr. Janet Bahouth. I am a crash safety engineer. I have a degree in mechanical engineering, Doctor of Science degree in transportation safety from George Washington University in DC. And I live and I work in Howard County with my husband and 3 boys. They keep me busy. When I'm not with them, I own and run Impact Research. We started in 2007 in Howard County. We are in Columbia, in the heart of Columbia. And at the company, we have a whole lot of smart people who include engineers, epidemiologists, statisticians, DBAs, database administrators, and software developers. We work for a whole smattering of different kinds of companies and government agencies. We work with the can't see that logo on there. It's the State Highway Administration, the DOT for Maryland. We work for CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention of Injury. We work for the Feds, the United States Department of Transportation. NHTSA, maybe you've heard NHTSA in the news, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. We also work for car companies. That's my favorite part. I work for BMW and do what they call the Accident Research Program. So it's our company that handles their research for safety and their research for investigating crashes. So just very briefly, because it's kind of important here, if there's a crash in a BMW anywhere in the country, and it's interesting enough for us to take a look at, and interesting means we had a fatality, or we had injuries that probably shouldn't have happened. Why did they? Or something strange happened with the car. Why did the car act that way? Or the data that we get immediately after the crash, the data that's uploaded, if that's showing something a little strange, then we check it out. We send out our crash investigator, and they go out and they collect all the information at the scene. I'll get into a little bit more detail in describing our crash today. Same sort of thing. We collect all the information that we can to basically find out if the car did what it was supposed to do. We also work for Toyota. We do a lot of data crunching for Toyota. We look for safety in their data. And with the automotive manufacturers, all of them across the board, with the Automotive Alliance, their major concern, especially today, is safety. And we'll get into why. So at work, what do? We study car crashes. Why are they happening? How did they happen? And also, what I like the best is crash injuries. How are they happening? And why are they happening? In 2018, why are they happening? We crunch data. We dig through tons of data. It's big data to see what we could find out about crashes as a whole. And ultimately what we're doing is making cars safer, roadways safer. So this is what I do every day. I look at car crashes. Every day, inside and out, this is what I'm thinking about. Frontal collisions, side collisions, rear collisions, rollovers. Sometimes there's multiple impact collisions where you might have a frontal and then you spin off and then you hit a tree. Multiple impacts. Just a little hint, you're out of position now. Your seatbelt's not as effective. Your airbag's not as effective. All of these things come into play when we're discussing these, or when we're investigating these crashes. And what's most important is the people inside. You're in a frontal collision, you might have a lower limb injury. You're in a side impact like that, you're not walking away without a broken pelvis. Rear impact, I'm going to look at your spine. I'm going to look at your spinal cord and see what happened to it. And in a rollover, I hope your neck's okay. I hope you were belted and not hitting the roof. We're going to look at your neck and your head and brain injuries. So today's crash, somebody alluded to this out there with the question. Today's crash, I've seen it 1,000 times. I've seen it a lot. It happens every day across the United States. There's no discrimination. It happens to old, young, male, female. It happens all the time. It's called a T-bone crash. One of the cars is a frontal collision, and the other car is a side impact. T-bone. Happens all the time. They're all the same, except for the outcome. The outcomes are all different. And that depends on who's driving, what they were doing when they were driving, if they were belted or not. So all the outcomes always change. Same crashes over and over again. So in answer to your question, yep, this crash happened. Probably 30 times today already. So today we're going to discuss our crash. Multi-fatal crash at Solomon Island Road and Huntingtown High School. What's the first thing we do? Just like the officer said outside, scene inspection. They collect all of the evidence from the scene. That's just not picking up evidence. That's doing a total station survey of the crash. They have skid marks measured. They have sidewalks measured. They have distances from here to there. They do the entire scene. They do a vehicle inspection. This is what we do when we send our guys out to BMW crashes. They download 3,000 data points from those cars. So if you ever thought that you could get away with something and try and make it look like it was something different, you cannot. There is so much data in these cars today. We know everything from top to bottom. Medical records, that's where it gets juicy. Medical records are reviewed. Biomechanics review. Biomechanics is the movement of the body during the impact. And then, of course, there's an engineering review. How did the crash happen? So this is our scene. Sorry, it's a little faded there. I can't see it well. I'm going to go in a little deeper. You're all familiar with the intersection out here. So the vehicles, we had a minivan. It was a 2002 Chrysler Town & Country. And there's a sedan, 2004 Pontiac Bonneville. So the speed limit for the Pontiac, for the sedan, right on here in Solomon Island, is 55 miles an hour. But the travel speed, and I'll show you how we got that later, the travel speed for the minivan, about 10, because they're coming out of the school, right? The travel speed for the sedan was 62 miles an hour. I'll show you how we know. So this scene is set up here at the traffic signal. It's a controlled intersection. And what happened was the sedan disobeyed the red light signal. They crossed directly in the front of the path of the minivan. The front of the sedan hit the side of the minivan. So the data download, the black box. We've all heard of the black boxes in airplane crashes, right? Every one of your cars has one. They have just as much detail in there, if not more, than the black boxes that you already know about with airplanes. So the black boxes, they tell us a whole slew of information. They give us every data point that they possibly can from 5 seconds prior to the crash, all the way to the point of the crash. That's a long time. When a crash takes 300 milliseconds to happen, 5 seconds is an eternity. We have a lot of information leading up to that crash. We have vehicle speed, we have accelerator or throttle position, engine RPM, we have steering input. Where was the steering wheel at 5 seconds or even at the crash? Was the brake on? Was there ABS activity? Now what's interesting about this is, and this is for the sedan, the frontal impact, down there at time 0, remember that's when the crash happened, the car is going 62 miles an hour. Also at time 0, 0 steering input. It's going straight. Solomon Island is a straight road. It's going straight. You might notice that for 5 seconds prior to that, there's not much going on. And then the brake at the time of the crash, no braking. And look up that line. No braking for 5 seconds prior to the crash. 5 seconds is an eternity for a crash that takes 300 milliseconds. This tells me the driver of the sedan had no idea it was coming. There's no evasive maneuver. They had no idea they were about to crash. This is the download for the minivan. Let's take a look at 2 seconds prior to the crash. If you look at the throttle position, it changed at 2 seconds. From 2 seconds to 1.5, it changed. Something's happening. The driver saw something. Something happened. They took their foot off the gas. And then from 1.5 seconds to 1 second, now their foot's going on the brake. Austin saw that crash coming. He knew something was about to happen. He reacted. All right, a little bit more detail about the minivan. We have 4 occupants. Austin was driving. He's under 18, belted, fatal. Front seat passenger was Kat. Again, under 18, belted. She was trapped in the vehicle. I'll give you a little bit more information about her injuries. She was injured and in critical condition. Then we had Olivia in the back seat behind the driver. She was trapped and injured and in serious condition. And then Jimmy was in the back, under 18, he was belted and minor injuries. The sedan, 2 occupants. First, driver was unbelted. I'm sorry, Isaiah was belted, not injured, walked away. Walked away from a pretty hefty crash. Front seat passenger, Ben, he was unbelted, he was ejected through the windshield. You're not belted, it happens a lot. And it was a fatal outcome for Ben. So into the medical investigation now. This is where it gets heavy because there's a lot of injuries. There's a lot of small injuries that mean big things. So for the first one, we have the sedan, Isaiah, he was belted. A couple of injuries, mostly general muscle soreness. And as part of his arrest, they do a toxicology blood draw. And in this instance, National Medical Services comes back with a toxicology report. There's no hiding it. Blood alcohol content was 0.06 and positive for opiates. You can't cover up anything. It's known, it's out there. Science is not in your favor when you're doing something wrong. He was incapacitated at the wheel, and our data download kind of implied that, right? So it's all coming together now because he was high and drunk, and he ran the red light. Front seat passenger, Ben. He was not belted. Isaiah was belted and he walked away. Ben wasn't belted for whatever reason. He was ejected through the windshield. What are his injuries? Traumatic brain injury. That's in the news a lot now with concussions, but this is beyond that. Traumatic brain injury for Ben was fatal, along with his skull fracture and at the atlanto-occipital dislocation. So the atlanto-occipital portion of your skull is right where your skull sits on top of your spine. And during the crash, I'll explain this in a little bit, during the crash he was ejected through the window, hit the other car, kind of bounced back in, and the way he hit his skull, his head separated from his spine. I didn't make this stuff up. This happens a lot. We have lots of rib fractures. The entire right side of his body, flail chest. Flail chest means you used to have a structure to your rib cage. There's so many fractures now. There's no structure. It's just flail. It's hanging there. There's no protection for the internal organs at this point. He also had facial fractures on the right. You can imagine he hit the minivan with the right side of his face. He also had head abrasions and lacerations. All right, in the minivan, we had Austin. He was belted. He should be okay, except somebody was drunk and high that night and did something stupid. So his injuries, rib fractures, bilateral, it's on both sides, flail chest. He doesn't have a chest anymore. He's just got organs inside that are unprotected now. What killed him probably was a heart laceration. Laceration is just a cut. Heart laceration, you can imagine, one of the most important organs in your body. You lacerate that, good luck. Lung contusions, it's just bruising on your lungs. You can imagine where he's bruising on his lungs. There's a CT scan that shows the light part on there. That's the bruising, that's the blood inside your lungs. Pelvic fracture. Remember I talked about the side impacts? Good luck walking away from that crash without a pelvic fracture. Acetabulum as well. Yeah, acetabulum is your hip, same sort of injury, same time. Lacerations and contusions to his arms, so cuts and bruising to his arms and upper body. also on the right side. But he was hit on the left, so why is he bruised and contused on the right? Well, that's because Kat wasn't belted. So Kat wasn't belted, and during the crash, I'll talk about this in a little bit. During the crash, she impacted the driver. She impacted Austin. And that's where he's getting all that bruising, and that's what made her critical. She's unbelted. She was thrown to Austin's side. Her skull hits something over there. It was probably Austin that she hit, probably not Ted's, maybe his shoulder. Now she has a skull fracture. She has a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Subarachnoid hemorrhage is basically the covering all over your brain, and there's little tiny blood vessels everywhere. They popped, they broke, she's bleeding in her brain. Rib fractures, she was thrown to the side. She's got the console to deal with, she's got Austin to deal with, she's gonna break some ribs. And she also had a hand fracture. Her hand got caught underneath the driver's seat. Then we have Olivia in the back seat. She's sitting behind Austin. She was belted. It didn't make her okay that night. She was belted and in serious condition. Her injuries, as you can imagine, are all left-sided. She has a fractured clavicle, collarbone is fractured, rib fractures on the left, leg fractures, foot fractures. Her foot's trapped because of the intrusion. Intrusion is where your car used to have your occupant space, and because you were hit, now your occupant space is squished in, and that part is called intrusion. Because of the intrusion, her foot was caught underneath the door. She also has foot fracture, contusions, and lacerations to her head. And that leaves us with Jimmy in the back. Jimmy was belted. He was the farthest away from that impact. And as you could see from the scene, he was the only one who was really okay in that car. He has minor injuries, contusions, and facial abrasions and lacerations from the glass or his arm flinging over to the side during the crash. All right, biomechanics. This is my favorite part. Biomechanics is the study of how bodies move and how bodies move during a crash and why they're moving during the crash. It's all about forces. It's all about just movement because of what's happening in the crash. So let's look at Isaiah. He's belted. He has a frontal collision. His impacts, his biomechanics show us he's going to go forward with the collision, right? He's belted. He did everything right that night, except drink and be high. He did everything right that night to keep him safe in the car. His airbag would have worked, seatbelt worked with the airbag. They do not work independently. He was okay. He walked away from that crash. Ben, he was ejected. So upon impact, he was ejected through the windshield. His head and chest probably contacted the other car at 62 miles an hour. And his cause of death, as I mentioned before, was the AO dislocation. His head came off of his neck. And the time to death, luckily for him, it would have been immediate. Austin, he's belted. On impact, he had a direct load from the impacting vehicle. He is right there at the point of impact. There's nothing he could have done. He tried to evade the crash. He tried to do something. He saw it coming. There's nothing he could do. He was at the mercy of the drunk driver. His chest was crushed. Internal injuries, traumatic injuries that ultimately killed him. His cause of death was that laceration, a huge cut to his heart and his lungs. He bled out. And bleeding out means that his time to death is probably minutes. So as Ben's screaming, trying to get help for his friend, Austin's just dying, and there's nothing else he can do. Kat, she was unbelted, front seat passenger. Upon impact, like we discussed, she's thrown to the driver's side. And that's what hurt her the most. Not so much the impact, but being unbelted and now allowing herself to be thrown to the driver's side. She contacted the driver somehow, his head probably. She has a fracture to the side of her head. She has a brain bleed. She'll probably spend 4 days in the hospital. And she'll have 4 days in the hospital. She might have a brain surgery to stop some bleeding or to alleviate some of the pressure in the skull. She'll have rehab for a long time because of that. She will have chronic headaches, can't get rid of it. Excedrin and Tylenol will not fix it. Olivia's in the back. She's belted. She's right near the point of impact. Same thing as Austin, not much she can do. She's thrown into the point of impact. Her left side injuries are all from the intrusion and from hitting the left side of the car. Her hospital stay will be about 2 days. Remember, her foot was caught underneath and fractured. She needs surgery, she needs pins, and she will have walking issues for the rest of her life. And Jimmy, he's belted in the back, and upon impact, he moved toward that impact side, right? He moved toward the impact. Physics brings you there. Luckily, he was belted, and he had some fling injuries, but that was about it. So what would happen if everyone was belted? Would it change the outcome for a lot of these people, or for any of these people? Let's see. For Ben, yeah, I hope that's obvious at this point. If he were belted, he would have felt exactly the way Isaiah did when he walked out of the car. Kat, she wouldn't have hit Austin. She wouldn't have head injury. She wouldn't have headaches for the rest of her life. No DUI, no distraction, what would have changed? Everything. This crash might not have happened if Isaiah was with it and saw the red light and saw the other car coming out. It might not have happened, so yeah, it could have changed a lot. Okay, so you know crashes. You've seen crashes. Maybe you've been in a crash and survived it. Maybe you were injured and you're doing better. We all know crashes. But I'm wondering if you've ever thought of crashes this way. So let's look into it. All right, what's a crash? A crash is a car is moving, right? Car's moving, it's got to be started that way. It's the car is moving, driving down the road, and eventually it's going to hit something. A deer, a tree, another car, something. It's going to hit something, and eventually the car will be stopped. Okay, so what? What I care about is what's happening inside the car. So what is it that stops you? Today's crash, the cars stopped each other. But what stopped Ben? What stopped Austin and Olivia? That's what we're interested in. So let's talk about it. 25 miles an hour. You're driving in your neighborhood, right? 25 miles an hour. It's actually hard to drive 25 miles an hour, right? It's slow. Next time you're in the neighborhood, actually look at your speedometer and realize, wow, 25 is really slow. Let's consider it. 25 miles an hour, driving in my neighborhood, safe and sound, belted, and I crash. So what are the crash forces that I feel? Let's talk about that in a minute. Instead, let's be unbelted. What are the crash forces I feel at 25? I'm serious, take a look and see how often you don't drive 25 in your neighborhood, okay? At 25, unbelted, 4,500 pounds of force your body has to deal with. At 25 miles an hour, that's the physics. At 25 miles an hour, 4,500 pounds of force your size body has to deal with. That's equivalent to a fall from a 4-story building. It's equivalent to running into that guy. It's a ton of weight. It's a ton of force that your fragile body needs to deal with. So the question is, can you lift 4,500 pounds? No. Can you stop 4,500 pounds from moving? Can you stop 4,500 pounds from pushing you? And obviously, the whole idea is I'm not stronger than a crash. So, with crashes, the higher the speed of the crash, the higher the crash force. So today's crash, you're in your car going 60 miles an hour. The sedan was going about 62. You got 10,000 pounds now. That's highway speeds. I mean, we go even faster on the highways. That's kind of highway speeds. 10,000 pounds of force, and yes, that's what Isaiah and Ben had to deal with. They were going 62 miles an hour. They had 10,000 pounds of force to deal with. Is it any surprise Ben died? So what do seatbelts do? And why is it that you can survive a 60-mile-an-hour crash? Isaiah did. Why is that? It's because the seatbelts lower the crash forces, and they slow down your crash. This is a crash test put on by NHTSA. It'll play again. The top one is an unbelted dummy. The lower one is a belted dummy. And there'll be a close-up shot in a second. And I left out how fast this crash is because I want you guys to guess. This is the unbelted dummy up close. Doesn't look so fun. That's only 35 miles an hour. 35 miles an hour is what they do a lot of crash tests at. So the big question for especially people of your age, is it different in the back seat? I'm safer in the back seat. Same car, same crash, same amount of force, but I'm safer in the back seat. And unfortunately, that's not true, because in the rear seat passengers are 3 times more likely to die if they're in a crash and they're unbelted. 3 times more likely. If your mama told you to sit in the back because it's safer back there, you better buckle up, and I'm not even sure if it's safer anymore. With all the technology that we're putting in cars these days for the front seat, I'm wondering if we're neglecting the back. The other problem is this. Don't forget about your friends and family in the front seat, because it is not just about you anymore. You can buckle up or you can't, whatever, it's up to you. But now you have to worry about everybody else in the car.
A simulated 35-mile-per-hour impact, the unbelted dummy slams into the back of the driver's seat, pushing the driver dummy into the deploying airbag and steering wheel.
So in a frontal collision, like the one we had out here, let's say somebody was sitting behind Isaiah. Isaiah's belted, he walked away. You put a 150-pound person behind him, that's what he's got to deal with. That was just 35 miles an hour. Can you imagine Isaiah buckled up and did the right thing, and now his friend behind him is going to be in a crash and kill him because he didn't buckle up. Drivers are 2 times more likely to die in a crash if their rear seat occupants are not belted. Again, it's not just about you anymore. All right, here's some statistics. Fatalities on the roads in 2015, there were 22,639 fatalities on the road in the US in 2015. In 2016, it went up, and let me tell you, in my world, people are flipping out because we are safety conscious. Our cars are safer. Why on earth are we having more fatalities? What's happening? It was actually part of our job to figure that out. So here's a whole lot of reasons: driver age, restraint use, alcohol, vehicle, safety rating of your car, distraction, elderly, infrastructure, meaning are your roads up to par? So I have a what if we were to change one of those and we looked at restraint use. So what we have, like we said, in 2016, 23,714 fatalities on US roadways. That's with 90% of the US buckling up. And that's a fact. People go out and actually observe people using belts or not using belts. 90% in 2016, 90% of the US are buckled up. That's an A, it's pretty good. Not good enough. What if in 2016, 95% of the US was buckled? Well, we would drop down that fatality by 7.5%. We'd save almost 2,000 lives. If it were my kid, or my husband, or my parents, I want them to be one of them that we saved. What if we had 98% of the country belted? We dropped fatalities by almost 20%. We're saving almost 3,000 lives. In your head, who are you saving by putting that seatbelt on now? All right, Ryan Anyone's story. Ryan Anyone is a teen, unbelted, and in the rear seat. And actually, Ryan Anyone is Calvin and Alex. These 2 kids are from Montgomery County. And they were at a party. There was some alcohol there, high school. And in leaving, they decided to get in the back of their friend's car, and they weren't belted. The driver was belted, the front seat passenger was belted. Driver thought, I need to get home fast. Curfew is not looking good. I gotta get home fast. I need to avoid that speed camera. so I'm going to go off the side of the road to avoid the speed camera. It won't detect me. Go back on the side of the road and lose control. Now my car's flipping. It hit a lot of trees before it came to rest. And before it came to rest, after flipping and hitting trees, Calvin and Alex were probably already dead. They were not belted in the back. The two kids in the front seat walked away. Here's another Ryan. His name is Dominic, football player. He was going somewhere. He was full scholarship, I think, to Alabama. And in a crash, not belted in the back seat, car rolled, he was ejected, killed, everyone else walked away. Rollovers aren't that horrible a crash, unless you're unbelted. That's Jasmine, same sort of thing. She's in an SUV with her friends. Friends walked away, she's unbelted in the back. She did not walk away, she died that night. And this is Ryan. Ryan's dad is a friend of mine, actually.
Jim, the young man killed was 15 years old. He was in a car with 4 other teenagers. They were coming from a youth ministry meeting. They were on their way to a Burger King. Then came the crash. Hear now from the victim's father.
You knew when you saw the car, it was just that recipe for disaster. Country road, downhill, young driver, 5 kids in the car back. It's just like a couple years ago when we had all those tragedies in the DC area.
Tom Didone is a captain with the Montgomery County Police Department. He has spent most of his career teaching teenagers to drive safely. Today he found himself at this church in Damascus making funeral arrangements for his son. 15-year-old Ryan Didone killed in a car crash last night on a winding rural road in Montgomery County.
You can't blame anybody, it's just bad circumstances, but even your own kids are not invincible. Had to tear you apart. It did.
So today Tom Didone is still a captain at Montgomery County. He is still doing seatbelt enforcement and safety and education. And if his kid wasn't safe, his kid who went to all of these functions that Tom went to and ran, if his kid wasn't safe, I don't know who is. It kind of scares me about my 3 kids, to be honest. So what are the stats at this high school? I'll tell you, 1 out of every 60 people was involved in a serious crash last year in Maryland. 1 out of every 60 people. That means 22 of you will be in a crash this year. 1 out of every 200 people was seriously injured in a crash in Maryland last year. That means 7 of you will be seriously injured in a crash this year. 1 out of every 12,500 people was killed in a crash in Maryland last year. That means 18 people in Calvert County alone will be killed in a crash this year. And of course, we hope the answer to that question is no. So the most important question of all of this is, when will your crash happen? I know you're all invincible. I am too. But you really got to think and remember what happened outside today and how real it was. And it wasn't theater, it was reality put in front of you. When will your crash happen? So I'm hoping that hurricanes buckle up. And again, I'm Janet Bahouth, and thanks for being here.
All right, real quick, wrestling team. You guys, anybody here for the wrestling team that hasn't already left, make sure you head out, because you guys are going down to be recognized for winning the state title. Good job, guys. So wrestling team, good, head out. Tell Dr. Lawrence, all right, let's give him a round of applause. Good job, fellas. All right, our next guest speaker is Ms. Jenny Weaver.